June 3rd, 1942. Evening settles over Berlin like a drawn curtain. The summer light fading from the windows of the Reich Chancellery. Inside the operations wing, maps dominate every wall. The Eastern Front stretches across the largest table, covered in colored pins and tactical markers that tell a story of advance, consolidation, and anticipated triumph. The men gathered around these maps carry themselves with the practiced authority of professionals who have spent decades mastering the mechanics of war. Reichsfuhrer Victor Steiner stands at the head of the table, 53 years old, but moving with the restless energy of a man half his age. His hands trace routes across the Soviet territories, his voice animated as he describes the coming summer offensive. Operation Blue, the final thrust, the decisive campaign that will break Soviet resistance and secure Germany's eastern flank before winter returns. Generalfeldmarschall Ernst Weber, 60 years old and carved from loyalty rather than imagination, nods at every statement. His role has always been clear. Translate the vision into orders. Ensure the machinery functions. Never question the fundamental assumption. Weber has built a career on this principle. And at this stage of his life, he sees no reason to abandon what has served him well. General Friedrich Hartmann sits further down the table, 52 years old with the posture of a man who listens more than he speaks. As head of operations, Hartmann has spent the war converting strategic ambitions into tactical realities, calculating logistics, measuring capabilities against objectives. His mind works in numbers, in ratios, in the cold calculations that determine whether armies advance or starve. Tonight, he listens to the plans for Operation Blue and runs silent equations that no one has asked him to perform. Gross Admiral Klaus Richter occupies a chair slightly removed from the main group, representing a service that operates in a different element entirely. At 51, Richter commands Germany's submarine fleet, the U-boats that prowl the Atlantic, hunting the convoys that carry American supplies to Britain. His war is measured in tonnage sunk, in ships sent to the bottom. In the slow process of attrition, he reports success regularly, as expected. But in private moments, he reviews loss rates that climb with each passing month. The briefing continues. Officers present updates from across the theater. North Africa, the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and finally, almost as an afterthought, the Pacific. A junior staff officer delivers a summary compiled from Japanese communications. The Imperial Navy is preparing an operation near a remote atoll called Midway, northwest of Hawaii. Intelligence suggests the Americans may have carriers in the area. The Japanese High Command expresses confidence in achieving decisive results. Steiner waves a hand dismissively. We leave the Pacific to our allies. Japan has demonstrated its capabilities. Pearl Harbor proved that American naval power was a fiction. The United States remains divided, overstretched, unable to concentrate its forces effectively. Weber echoes the assessment. The Americans are still recovering from December. Our intelligence indicates they lack the carrier strength to challenge Japanese operations. Hartmann says nothing, but his eyes move to a folder of documents he brought to the meeting. Inside are production estimates from American shipyards, compiled from multiple intelligence sources. The numbers tell a different story than the one being spoken aloud. He considers mentioning them, then calculates the reception such information would receive. Steiner does not welcome data that contradicts established narratives. The figures would be dismissed as exaggerated, as propaganda, as the desperate fabrications of an enemy trying to appear stronger than reality allows. Hartmann closes the folder. Richter notices the gesture. The two men have developed an understanding over the months of working together. Both deal in concrete realities rather than ideological certainties. Both have learned that certain truths are better kept private until circumstances demand their revelation. The briefing moves on. Supply routes, fuel allocations, manpower transfers. The Eastern Front consumes everything. The offensive must succeed quickly, before autumn, before the ground turns to mud and then to ice. Speed is essential. Decisive results are mandatory. As the meeting concludes, Hartmann gathers his papers and prepares to leave. Richter catches his eye across the room. A brief acknowledgement between professionals who recognize complexity when others see only clarity. In the hallway outside, away from Steiner's presence, Weber allows himself a moment of doubt. Do you believe we can achieve everything by autumn? Hartmann chooses his words carefully. Achieving objectives requires three elements: adequate force, sufficient logistics, and time. We have the first two. The third depends on variables beyond our control. Weber nods. Satisfied with the diplomatic non-answer, Richter walks alongside them for a few steps before diverging toward the Naval Operations Center. Before he leaves, he offers a quiet observation. The Japanese communications about Midway lack their usual confidence. I noticed the language was more cautious than previous operations. Hartmann files this detail away. Caution from a military force that has known nothing but success for 6 months. An anomaly worth noting. The three men separate, each returning to their respective domains. The Reich Chancellery empties for the evening. The maps remain under the lights. Pins marking positions. Arrows showing intended advances. On a smaller map in the corner, barely noticed, the Pacific Ocean stretches blue and vast. A tiny notation marks Midway Atoll. Tomorrow, that notation will mean something different. But tonight, in the final hours before knowledge arrives, the assumptions remain intact. Japan controls the Pacific. America is weak and recovering. Germany will defeat the Soviet Union before winter. Time favors the swift and the bold. These certainties will not survive the morning. June 4th, 1942. Dawn breaks over Berlin at 4:07 in the morning. Light creeping across a city that has not yet learned what happened half a world away. At the Reich Chancellery, the overnight intelligence staff compiles reports from across the global theater. Most items are routine. Positions updated. Minor engagements reported. Supply movements tracked. Then, shortly after 8:00 a.m., a communication arrives through Japanese naval channels, relayed through diplomatic links. The language is sparse, almost cryptic. Japanese forces have made contact with American carrier units near Midway. Engagement is underway. Outcome uncertain at this time. The intelligence officer who receives this message reads it 3 times. Outcome uncertain. The phrase stands out. Japanese military communications typically project confidence. Even in the midst of combat, uncertainty is not their style. He adds the message to the morning briefing folder and sends it upstairs. At 9:00 a.m., Steiner receives his daily intelligence summary. He sits at his desk, reading through updates from the Eastern Front with close attention. When he reaches the Pacific section, he barely pauses. An engagement near Midway. The Americans attempting to interfere with Japanese operations. Expected. He moves on to the next item. Weber receives the same summary 10 minutes later. He reads the Midway notation and makes a mental note that the Japanese will likely announce a victory by afternoon, as they have with every previous encounter. He files the report and returns his attention to logistics planning for Operation Blue. Hartman receives his copy at 9:30 a.m. He reads the Midway item once, then again, then a third time. Outcome uncertain. He reaches for previous Japanese operational reports from his files. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, the Indian Ocean. Every communication had contained language of success, of American forces destroyed or driven off, of objectives achieved. The absence of that language now creates a hollow space in the text, a silence that speaks louder than words. Hartman picks up his telephone and calls the Naval Operations Center. Richter answers. Have you seen the Midway report? Reading it now. What do you make of the phrasing? A pause on the line. Naval combat between carrier forces is decided quickly. Either you destroy the enemy's ability to strike back, or you fail. There is no middle ground. If the Japanese had achieved decisive results, they would say so. And if they have not, then they are managing information until they understand the extent of the problem. Hartman thanks him and hangs up. He sits at his desk, the report in front of him. Around him, the machinery of command continues its daily rhythm. Officers move through hallways. Telephones ring. Typewriters clatter. The war proceeds according to established patterns. But somewhere in the Pacific, something has happened that does not fit the pattern. And the absence of clarity feels more ominous than a confirmed disaster would be. By midday, additional communications arrive. Still fragmentary. Still cautious. American carriers engaged at distance. Aircraft losses on both sides. Japanese objectives being contested. Contested, not achieved. Contested. Hartman begins requesting follow-up intelligence with increasing frequency. Each response provides less clarity than the one before. The Japanese are not releasing detailed information. Their silence grows heavier with each passing hour. In a normal engagement, carrier forces would have decided the outcome by now. Aircraft would have struck. Damage would be assessed. One side would be withdrawing or destroyed. The fact that reports continue to arrive without resolution suggests something unprecedented is happening. At 2:00 p.m., Hartman walks to Richter's office. The admiral is studying charts of the Pacific, trying to reconstruct the tactical situation from incomplete information. How long does carrier combat typically last? From first strike to resolution. Hours, not days. The Americans attacked Pearl Harbor at dawn. By afternoon, the outcome was complete. So this prolonged engagement suggests what? Either both sides are damaged and maneuvering for position, or the fighting is more intense than the Japanese anticipated. Neither scenario indicates the kind of decisive success we were led to expect. Hartman returns to his office and drafts a brief memo to Weber. requesting that Pacific intelligence be given higher priority in the next briefing cycle. He phrases it carefully, without alarm. As a matter of professional thoroughness, Weber approves the request without comment. The afternoon wears on. The intelligence staff checks diplomatic channels, neutral observers, anything that might provide clarity. The fog of war, normally expected in ground combat, has descended over naval operations thousands of miles from any German observer. All they have are Japanese communications, and those communications are choosing their words with unusual care. At 5:00 p.m., another update arrives. American resistance stronger than anticipated. Japanese forces achieving tactical success but at higher cost than projected. Hartman reads this and feels something shift in his understanding. Higher cost than projected. This is the language of commanders who are explaining why objectives were not met as promised. This is the language of contingency, of revision, of plans that have encountered friction. He does not share this interpretation with anyone yet. Professional instinct tells him to wait for harder data. But privately, he begins to suspect that something has gone wrong in the Pacific. Not catastrophically wrong, perhaps, but wrong enough that the Japanese high command is being careful about how they shape the narrative. As evening approaches, the Reich Chancellery begins to empty. Another day of war concludes. The Eastern Front remains the primary focus. Operation Blue moves closer to launch. The maps are updated. The plans are refined. On the periphery of attention, the Pacific Theater continues its mysterious silence. Hartman remains at his desk after most others have left. He drafts a personal assessment, not for distribution, but for his own clarity. He lists what is known, what is suspected, what the patterns of communication suggest. His conclusion: the engagement at Midway has not produced the kind of decisive Japanese victory that previous operations achieved. American carriers were present and operational. They struck back. The outcome remains unclear, but the pattern of Japanese communications indicates concern rather than confidence. He locks the assessment in his desk drawer. Tomorrow will bring more information. Until then, all he has are incomplete fragments and the professional instinct that something significant has occurred beyond the horizon of reliable intelligence. That night, he sleeps poorly. His mind continues to process the limited data, searching for patterns, testing hypotheses. Outside his window, Berlin rests under summer darkness. The war continues on multiple fronts. Millions of men are positioned according to plans that assume certain fundamental truths about the balance of power. One of those truths may have changed today, but no one knows for certain yet. The waiting is its own form of tension. June 5th, 1942. Morning arrives with the weight of anticipated news. Hartman reaches his office early. Before the overnight intelligence summaries have been distributed, he wants to see the raw reports before they are filtered through the briefing process. The first item in the queue comes from a neutral Swedish diplomatic source, transmitted overnight through circuitous channels. The language is clinical, detached, the way neutral observers describe events without taking sides. Unconfirmed reports from Pacific naval sources indicate severe damage to multiple Japanese aircraft carriers during engagement at Midway. American carrier forces believed to have inflicted significant losses before withdrawing from immediate area. Japanese objectives at Midway Atoll not achieved. Total casualty figures unavailable, but estimated to be substantial on both sides. Hartman reads this 3 times. Severe damage to multiple carriers. Not one, multiple. Significant losses. Objectives not achieved. He immediately calls Richter. The admiral's voice is tense. I received the same report 10 minutes ago. I'm trying to verify through our own naval intelligence, but the Japanese are not releasing official statements yet. If this is accurate, what are the strategic implications? Richter's answer comes after a long pause. Carriers cannot be replaced quickly. Trained pilots cannot be replaced at all. If Japan has lost multiple carriers, they have lost their offensive capability in the Pacific for months, possibly longer. And if American carriers remain operational, then the initiative shifts. Hartman thanks him and prepares for the morning briefing. This information will reach Steiner within the hour. The question is how he will receive it. At 9:00 a.m., the senior staff convenes. Weber presides, distributing the overnight summaries. The Midway item is listed third. After Eastern Front updates and Mediterranean reports, Weber reads the Swedish report aloud, his voice carefully neutral. Unconfirmed reports suggest the engagement at Midway resulted in damage to Japanese carrier forces. Details remain incomplete. We are awaiting official Japanese assessment. Steiner interrupts. Unconfirmed, meaning unreliable. Neutral sources often exaggerate events they observe from a distance. Weber nods. Entirely possible. Mein Reichsführer. We should wait for verified information. Hartman raises his hand. Permission to speak. Steiner waves impatiently. The pattern of Japanese communications over the past 36 hours suggests significant deviation from their standard operational reporting. Previous engagements were characterized by immediate claims of decisive success. The current silence, combined with neutral observer reports, indicates at minimum a more costly engagement than anticipated. Steiner's eyes narrow. You are suggesting Japanese incompetence. I'm suggesting that American capabilities may have been underestimated. If American carriers were positioned and prepared to counterattack, that indicates intelligence gathering and operational competence beyond what we previously assessed. Weber interjects, attempting to mediate. General Hartmann, we must be cautious about drawing conclusions from incomplete data. I agree entirely, which is why I recommend we request detailed casualty and damage reports from our Japanese counterparts as a matter of priority. If the engagement was routine, they will have no difficulty providing such information. If they resist, that tells us something as well. Steiner considers this, then nods. Very well. Request the information. But I will not accept speculation dressed as analysis. We deal in facts. The briefing continues. Hartmann has made his point as strongly as current evidence allows. Now the waiting begins again. By afternoon, additional fragments arrive. A decoded American naval transmission, intercepted and translated, references to successful strikes against Japanese carriers. Names mentioned, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu. The transmission is fragmentary, possibly corrupted in decryption, but the basic content is clear enough. American forces are claiming to have struck multiple Japanese carriers. Richter brings this to Hartmann personally. This corroborates the Swedish report. If the Americans are transmitting these names, they believe they hit these specific ship. Hartmann studies the intercept. 4 carriers. The Japanese brought 4 fleet carriers to this operation. If even half are severely damaged, the strategic balance in the Pacific has shifted. They stand together in silence, both understanding what this means, but neither willing to state it fully until confirmation arrives. That confirmation comes at 6:00 p.m. The German naval attaché in Tokyo transmits a priority message. The language is formal, diplomatic, but the content is devastating. Japanese Naval Command acknowledges loss of 4 fleet carriers at Midway. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, total destruction. Significant pilot casualties. American carrier forces identified as Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet. American carrier Yorktown damaged but Enterprise and Hornet operational and withdrew from area. Operation to seize Midway atoll suspended. Hartmann reads this message in his office. Alone, 4 carriers, not damaged, lost, total destruction. The words carry a finality that erases all ambiguity. He sits at his desk for several minutes, processing the implications. Then he picks up the telephone and calls Weber. The General Feldmarshal's voice is strained. I have seen the report. We need an emergency conference. Steiner has called one for 8:00 p.m. tonight. Hartmann hangs up and begins preparing his assessment. This will not be a routine briefing. This is the moment when assumptions collapse and new realities must be confronted. At 8:00 p.m., the senior staff assembles. The atmosphere is different from the previous meetings. The casual confidence has been replaced by something harder to define. Not quite fear, not quite shock, more like the feeling of standing on ground that has suddenly revealed itself to be less solid than believed. Steiner sits at the head of the table. He does not speak immediately. Weber distributes copies of the Tokyo message. The room reads in silence. Finally, Steiner speaks. 4 carriers. In one engagement, his voice is controlled, but the strain shows at the edges. How is this possible? The question hangs in the air. Several officers shift uncomfortably. No one wants to be the first to answer. Hartmann decides the truth must be stated. American intelligence successfully positioned their carriers for ambush. Their aircraft achieved surprise despite Japanese air superiority. Their pilots executed coordinated strikes that overwhelmed Japanese defenses. This was not luck. This was competent naval warfare. Steiner's hands gripped the edge of the table. You are telling me the Americans, who we were assured were recovering from Pearl Harbor, managed to destroy half the Japanese carrier fleet? Not half. All of their operational fleet carriers in that theater. Yes, and their own carriers. 2 operational, 1 damaged but survivable. The Japanese failed to achieve equivalent destruction of American forces. The silence that follows is profound. Weber attempts to contextualize. This is a setback for Japan. Certainly, but it does not directly affect our operations in Europe. Hartmann turns to face him. It affects our timeline. Every strategic calculation we have made, it assumed Japanese control of the Pacific would prevent full American concentration in Europe. If Japan has lost its offensive capability, American production can focus on building forces for intervention here. The buffer we relied upon no longer exists. Steiner's voice rises. We defeat the Soviet Union before American forces can mobilize. Operation Blue will succeed. It must succeed. Hartman meets his eyes. Operation Blue must succeed by spring 1943 at the latest. After that, American industrial production will begin to overwhelm Axis capabilities. How do you know this? Because I have read the production figures. American shipyards are building 12 new fleet carriers. Their aircraft factories are operating at scales we cannot match. They absorbed the losses at Pearl Harbor and grew stronger. They will absorb any losses at Midway and grow stronger still. This is not ideology. This is industrial calculus. The room goes very still. No one has spoken this directly to Steiner before. Richter adds his voice. Supporting Hartman. The Atlantic campaign confirms this pattern. Convoy escorts are improving. Sinkings are becoming more difficult. Loss rates for our U-boats are rising. American production is not only replacing their losses, but expanding beyond pre-war levels. If they can do this while fighting Japan, imagine what they can do if Japan ceases to be a meaningful threat. Steiner stands abruptly. Then we will work faster. Fight harder. Accept no excuses. He leaves the room. The remaining officers sit in uncomfortable silence. Weber finally speaks, his voice hollow. We will prepare revised timelines for Operation Blue. The meeting dissolves. Hartman returns to his office and finds Richter waiting for him. Thank you for supporting the assessment. Richter nods. It needed to be said. Whether it changes anything, I doubt, but at least the truth is now in the record. Hartman sits heavily in his chair. 4 carriers in a single engagement. The Japanese were supposed to be invincible. They were invincible against an enemy that remained surprised and unprepared. Today they faced an enemy that was neither. That is the real lesson of Midway, which is that the Americans are learning and we are running out of time. June 6th through June 10th. The days following confirmation of the Midway disaster pass in a strange liminal state. Outwardly, operations continue normally. Plans proceed. Orders are issued. The machinery of war maintains its rhythm. But among the senior staff, a reassessment has begun. Quiet, private, conducted in low voices during moments between official business. Weber requests comprehensive production comparisons from the Intelligence Directorate. When the reports arrive, he reads them alone in his office and says nothing to anyone. The numbers confirm Hartman's warnings. American industrial output is accelerating. Aircraft, ships, tanks, trucks, every category shows expansion rather than mere replacement of losses. The gap between Axis production and Allied production is not narrowing. It is widening month by month. The numerical certainty becomes less favorable. Weber locks these reports in his safe and does not mention them in briefings. Richter reviews updated casualty projections for submarine warfare. His analysts present scenarios based on current loss rates, escort effectiveness, and American shipbuilding capacity. Every scenario reaches the same conclusion within 18 months. The U-boat campaign will shift from strategic advantage to unsustainable attrition. He files these projections and continues to report tactical successes while privately understanding they are temporary. Hartman prepares 3 separate strategic assessments, each exploring different paths to achieving decisive victory before American power fully mobilizes. Scenario 1. Accelerated offensive in the East. Knock out the Soviet Union before winter 1942. Problem. Logistics cannot support the required speed of advance. Fuel supplies insufficient. Supply lines already overextended. Scenario 2. Maximum Atlantic interdiction. Strangle American supply lines to prevent force buildup in Britain. Problem. U-boat losses already exceeding sustainable levels. American escort technology improving faster than German countermeasures. Scenario 3. Negotiate separate peace with Britain. Isolate the United States diplomatically. Problem. Britain shows no indication of accepting terms. Proposal would be rejected and possibly used for propaganda purposes. He stares at these assessments for a long time. Then he writes a 4th scenario. Scenario 4. No decisive victory achieved before American mobilization complete. Germany faces multi-front war against enemies with superior production, manpower, and resources. Outcome. Strategic impossibility of victory. Conflict becomes a war of attrition, favoring side with greater capacity to absorb losses. He does not distribute these assessments. He knows they would be rejected as defeatism. Instead, he files them in his personal records. Dated and sealed, on the evening of June 10th, Hartman remains in his office long after the others have departed. The building is quiet. Outside, summer darkness has settled over Berlin. The city sleeps, unaware of the equations being performed in these rooms. Hartman retrieves a blank sheet of paper and begins to write. Not an official report, not a military assessment, a personal memorandum addressed to no one, meant only as a record for himself. June 10th, 1942. Today marks 1 week since we learned of Midway. In that time, I have reviewed every available intelligence report, every production estimate, every strategic scenario. My conclusion is unavoidable. Germany has approximately 18 months to achieve decisive victory over the Soviet Union. If we succeed by spring 1943, we can consolidate Europe, fortify our position, and potentially negotiate from strength. If we fail to achieve this outcome, we will face a prolonged war against enemies whose combined industrial capacity exceeds ours by factors we cannot overcome through superior tactics or morale. Midway demonstrated that the United States possesses professional military competence. They gathered intelligence. They positioned forces effectively. They executed coordinated strikes. They sank 4 carriers while preserving their own fleet. This was not luck. This was institutional capability. The Japanese will not recover from Midway within any time frame relevant to our strategic requirements. American production will continue to expand. Every month that passes without decisive resolution in the East strengthens the enemy and weakens our relative position. I am a professional soldier. I have served for 30 years. I understand obligation. I understand orders. I will continue to perform my responsibilities to the best of my ability. But I also understand the numbers. And the figures show that time is no longer our ally. The war we intended to win through speed and shock is transforming into a war of endurance. And endurance wars are won by the side that can sustain losses without operational collapse. I will serve professionally until the system collapses, or I do, because that is what soldiers do. We serve regardless of outcome. Service does not require victory. It requires only character. But I will also record the truth for history, for accountability, for whoever inherits the responsibility of understanding how this war unfolded. Midway was not a Japanese defeat. It was a warning. We have been warned. What we do with that warning will determine everything that follows. He signs the memorandum, dates it, and seals it in an envelope marked personal record, historical archive only. He places it in his locked drawer alongside his classified assessments. Then he turns off his desk lamp and sits in darkness for several minutes. Outside, Berlin sleeps. The Eastern Front awaits Operation Blue. The Atlantic War continues. In the Pacific, American carriers move across open ocean. Their crews gaining experience. Their commanders gaining confidence. The war proceeds. Plans are made. Orders are issued. Professional soldiers that continue their obligations. But in this office, in this moment, one man has calculated how it ends. 18 months. Maybe less. Probably not more. He will serve those 18 months with the same professionalism he has brought to 30 years of service. He will do his obligation. He will maintain his honor. He will also watch the predictions unfold with the grim certainty of a man who understands that knowing the future and being able to change it are entirely different things. Hartmann stands, locks his office, and walks through the empty corridors of the Reichschancellery. His footsteps echo in the silence. Tomorrow will bring new briefings, new orders, new tactical problems to solve. But tonight, the truth rests in a sealed envelope in a locked drawer. Dated, documented, waiting for history to confirm what numerical analysis has already proven. The Battle of Midway sank 4 carriers in the Pacific. It also sank something in Berlin. The last illusion that speed could defeat capacity, that will could overcome industrial production, that the war would end before the consequences of underestimating America became unmanageable. The warning has been delivered. Now comes the part where the warning is ignored. And the price for that ignorance is paid in full. June gives way to July. Summer heat settles over Berlin. But inside the Reich Chancellery, a different kind of pressure builds. Intelligence reports arrive daily from multiple theaters, and with each passing week, the patterns that Hartmann predicted begin to manifest with disturbing precision. July 8th. A decoded American naval communication references offensive operations in the Solomon Islands. The language is confident, operational, immediate. American forces are not recovering defensively. They are attacking less than 5 weeks after Midway. Hartmann brings this to the morning briefing. Weber reads it without comment. Steiner dismisses it as minor island fighting, peripheral to the main war. But Richter catches Hartmann's eye across the table, and both men understand what this represents. The Americans are not waiting. They are pressing their advantage while the Japanese are still reeling. July gives way to August. The Eastern offensive grinds forward, but not at the speed required. Resistance is fiercer than anticipated. Supply lines stretch. Fuel becomes a constant constraint. The maps still show German advances, but the arrows move more slowly than the planning documents promise. In the Atlantic, Richter's U-boats continue to sink tonnage, but the reports he reads privately tell a different story. Convoy escorts are better organized. Air coverage expands. Detection technology improves. His submarines still achieve kills, but they are working harder for each success. And the losses among his own boats climb steadily. August 12th. An intelligence summary arrives from Washington, compiled from multiple neutral sources. American war production figures for the second quarter of 1942. The numbers are staggering. Aircraft production, 93 units, a 40% increase over the first quarter. Naval construction, 8 new fleet carriers under construction, 5 already launched. Merchant shipping, replacement tonnage exceeding losses by substantial margins. Hartman reads these figures twice, then requests verification through independent sources. The verification comes back 3 days later. The numbers are accurate, possibly even conservative. He prepares a briefing document comparing Axis production to Allied production across all major categories. The graphs show lines that diverge rather than converge. The gap is not closing. It is widening at an accelerating rate. On August 18th, he requests a special strategic conference. Weber approves it reluctantly, sensing that the content will be unwelcome. The conference convenes on August 20th. The afternoon heat makes the conference room uncomfortable despite open windows. Steiner arrives irritated. Already burdened by difficult news from the Eastern Front, he wants solutions, not problems. Hartman distributes his analysis. Production comparisons, timeline projections, strategic scenarios. Weber shifts uncomfortably as he reads. Richter nods slowly, recognizing his own private conclusions now being presented formally. Steiner's jaw tightens with each page. Finally, Hartman speaks, Mein Reichsführer. I have prepared 3 scenarios for achieving decisive victory before American industrial production overwhelms our capabilities. I must present them honestly, including their constraints. Steiner waves impatiently. Proceed. Scenario 1. Accelerated offensive in the East. We concentrate all available forces and attempt to achieve Soviet collapse before winter. This requires defeating their armies in detail, capturing the Caucasus oil fields, and forcing a peace settlement before year's end. And the constraints? Logistics. We are already operating at maximum extension. Fuel supplies are insufficient to support the required tempo of operations. Our supply lines are vulnerable to partisan activity. Weather will deteriorate in 10 weeks. The physical limitations of distance and supply capacity make this scenario extremely high risk. Steiner's fingers drum on the table. Scenario 2. Maximum Atlantic interdiction. We redirect all available resources to submarine construction and operations. The goal is to sink Allied shipping faster than American yards can replace it, strangling the supply line to Britain and preventing forced buildup for eventual invasion. Richter speaks up before Hartman can continue. This scenario is already failing. Mein Reichsführer. Permit me to be direct. American shipbuilding capacity exceeds our sinking capacity. Our U-boat losses are rising. Escort technology is improving faster than our countermeasures. We are losing the tonnage race. Steiner turns to him sharply. Then we build more submarines. Richter's response is flat, factual. Our shipyard capacity is maximized. Training new crews takes 8 months minimum. Allied code breaking is suspected, but not confirmed. Even if we doubled our operational boats, current trends indicate we would still lose the tonnage race by mid-1943. Silence settles over the room. Hartman continues. Scenario 3. Diplomatic isolation of the United States. We seek separate peace with Britain, consolidating European control and removing one major enemy from the equation. This would allow us to concentrate forces against remaining threats. Weber actually laughs. A brief bitter sound. Britain will never negotiate while Churchill leads them. We have already explored this through neutral channels. They refuse all contact. Steiner stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Then what do you propose? General Hartman. Surrender. You bring me 3 scenarios, all of which you have already determined to be impossible. What is the purpose of this exercise? Hartman remains seated, his voice steady, to establish that we face strategic impossibility unless we achieve decisive results in the East within 6 months. After that, American power will begin to dominate all calculations. This is not defeatism. This is numerical reality. Numbers can be defeated by will, not in industrial warfare. Courage cannot manufacture oil. Ideology cannot build ships. We are fighting an opponent whose production capacity we cannot match, whose resources we cannot exhaust, whose strategic position allows them to absorb losses that would cripple us. Weber attempts to mediate. Perhaps if we... Steiner cuts him off. We do our obligation. We fight harder. We accept no excuses. The Eastern offensive will succeed because it must succeed. Dismissed. He walks out. The remaining officers sit in uncomfortable silence. After a long moment, Weber speaks quietly. You made your point. It was not well received. Hartman gathers his papers. Truth rarely is. That evening, word spreads through the staff that Steiner has ordered all strategic assessments to emphasize actionable plans rather than constraint analysis. The message is clear. Stop telling him what cannot be done. But among a small circle of officers, Hartmann's analysis circulates quietly. Some read it and dismiss it as pessimism. Others read it and recognize their own private fears, given formal expression. One of these officers is Major Hans Brandt, 35 years old, recently transferred from Eastern Front staff duties to the Operations Directorate. Brandt earned rapid promotion through competence and an idealistic belief in the cause he serves. He has seen combat, understands sacrifice, and genuinely believes that superior fighting spirit can overcome material disadvantage. He reads Hartmann's assessment with growing unease. The numbers do not lie, but they contradict everything he has been taught to believe. 3 days after the conference, Brandt approaches Hartmann during a quiet moment in the operations wing. "General, I read your strategic scenarios." Hartmann looks up from his desk, and Brandt struggles to frame his question. "Do you truly believe we cannot win?" Hartmann considers the young officer carefully. He sees himself 20 years ago. Competent, dedicated, believing that professional excellence could overcome any obstacle. "Major Brandt, I believe we can win if we achieve Soviet collapse by spring 1943. That window exists. It is narrow, but it exists. After that window closes, victory becomes impossible regardless of tactical brilliance." But the Reichsfuhrer seems confident. The Reichsfuhrer bases his confidence on ideological certainty. "I base my assessments on production figures and logistics calculations. Both cannot be simultaneously correct." Brandt absorbs this. What should officers like myself do with this knowledge? Do your obligation professionally. Plan well. Execute effectively. Control what you can control. Accept that outcomes often depend on factors beyond individual influence. That sounds like resignation. Hartmann shakes his head. It sounds like realism. You can serve honorably in a losing cause. Honor is not dependent on victory. It is dependent on character. Brandt leaves troubled. The conversation has undermined certainties he relied upon. For the first time, he begins to question whether his superiors truly believe their own public optimism. Over the following weeks, Brandt's presence in the Operations Directorate becomes more frequent. He works diligently, asks intelligent questions, and gradually earns Hartmann's professional respect. The younger officer represents something Hartmann recognizes: a version of himself before cynicism and calculation replaced idealism. September arrives. The Eastern Offensive continues but slows perceptibly. Stalingrad becomes a focal point. Urban combat grinding down German forces in brutal attrition. This was supposed to be the decisive breakthrough. Instead, it becomes a siege. October brings rain, then early frost. The window for decisive results narrows with each passing day. On October 15th, an incident occurs that changes the atmosphere within the high command. A staff colonel named Werner Ostheim, 42 years old and respected for his analytical work, submits a formal assessment supporting Hartmann's strategic conclusions. Ostheim's document is more direct, less diplomatic. It states plainly that current operations cannot achieve decisive victory before American mobilization reaches critical mass. It recommends immediate exploration of negotiated settlement, while Germany still holds strong positions. The document reaches Steiner's desk. His reaction is volcanic. Within 24 hours, Ostheim is relieved of staff duties and transferred to frontline command in the East. The transfer is presented as routine reassignment, but everyone understands its punitive nature. Hartmann learns of this through Richter, who heard it from naval liaison officers. They are making an example of him. Richter's voice is grim. Worse, they are establishing that honest assessment equals disloyalty. Brandt witnesses the aftermath. He sees Ostheim's empty office, hears the whispered explanations, understands the unspoken warning. When he approaches Hartmann seeking clarification, the general's response is careful. Colonel Ostheim expressed professional judgment based on available data. His transfer suggests that such judgment is no longer welcome in certain contexts. Brandt's face hardens. So we are expected to present false optimism. We are expected to execute our duties within the parameters deemed acceptable by leadership. Where those parameters conflict with professional assessment, we must choose whether to serve the system or challenge it. And what do you choose? I document truth privately. I present acceptable analysis publicly. I continue my service while maintaining a record of what was actually known versus what was officially acknowledged. Brandt struggles with this. That seems like cowardice. Hartmann's response is gentle. Perhaps, or perhaps it is pragmatism. Colonel Ostheim's honesty changed nothing except his own fate. My continued service allows me to protect younger officers, maintain some degree of rational planning, and preserve evidence for historical accounting. Which approach serves the greater good? I genuinely do not know. The conversation ends inconclusively. But Brandt's idealism has been further eroded. 6 weeks later, news arrives that changes everything about how Brandt views his service. A casualty report, routine among thousands. Crosses Hartmann's desk, Colonel Werner Ostheim, killed during Soviet artillery barrage on divisional headquarters. November 29th, 42. The official classification listed as combat death. Standard operational loss. Hartmann reads the notice and feels something cold settle in his chest. The timing is too convenient. The circumstances too neat. Artillery strikes on headquarters are not uncommon. But for a staff officer to be killed within 6 weeks of punitive transfer strains, credibility. He cannot prove anything. The report appears legitimate. The witnesses are dead or scattered. But professional instinct and the pattern of silencing dissent tell him this was no accident. That evening, Brandt is working late in the planning room when Hartmann finds him. The general closes the door carefully before speaking. Major, you asked me once what officers should do with uncomfortable knowledge. I'm going to give you additional guidance now. Never put dissenting analysis in writing under your own name. Never speak openly in meetings about strategic impossibilities. If you see truth clearly, carry it privately. Because Colonel Ostheim learned that speaking truth openly can be fatal, Brandt's face goes pale. You think his death was not accidental? I think that officers who challenge fundamental assumptions are being removed from positions of influence, whether through official channels or battlefield convenience. The result is the same. Dissent is being silenced. But that means we are no longer allowed to do our jobs properly. It means we must choose between professional honesty and survival. Those who choose honesty face consequences. Those who choose survival live with the knowledge that they serve a system that punishes truth. Brandt sits heavily. How do you live with that choice? Hartmann's smile is bitter. I write sealed memoranda that no one reads. I document reality for historical record while presenting acceptable analysis in official briefings. I serve the institution while understanding the institution is failing. It is not comfortable, Major, but it is the position professional soldiers occupy when ideology overrules reality. The younger officer leaves shaken. He has just learned that the system he serves is not only failing strategically, but actively eliminating those who recognize that failure. Over the following weeks, Brandt's behavior changes. He becomes quieter in meetings, more careful with his words. He continues his work professionally, but without the previous enthusiasm. Something fundamental has broken in his relationship with the cause he serves. In early November, he requests Hartmann for a private meeting. When they are alone, Brandt speaks with unusual directness. General, I am requesting transfer to combat assignment in the East. Hartmann sets down his pen. Why? Because I would rather fight an honest enemy than participate in institutional dishonesty. On the front, the enemy is visible and the mission is clear. Here, I'm asked to present analyses I know are false and pretend to believe conclusions that contradict reality. I am a soldier. I prefer honest combat to dishonest staff work. Hartmann tries to dissuade him, explaining that staff officers serve essential functions, that Brandt's analytical skills are needed, that frontline service carries significantly higher mortality risk, but the younger officer is adamant. I understand the risks. Sir. I accept them. What I cannot accept is continuing to serve in a position that requires me to validate lies. My conscience will not bear it. The transfer is approved within the week. Before he leaves, Brandt stops by Hartmann's office one final time. General, thank you for telling me the truth, even if I could not bear to live with it. They shake hands. Hartmann watches the young officer walk away and knows, with grim certainty, that he will never see him again. The honest ones always choose death over compromise. November 1942 brings the news that shifts the war irrevocably. The Soviet counteroffensive at Stalingrad begins. The German Sixth Army, which was supposed to capture the city and break Soviet resistance, finds itself encircled, hundreds of thousands of men trapped in a narrowing pocket. This was not supposed to happen. The Eastern Offensive was supposed to achieve decisive victory. Instead, it has created a catastrophic vulnerability. Hartmann reviews the situation maps with Weber and Richter. The three men stand around the table in silence, looking at the developing encirclement. Finally, Weber speaks. How did intelligence fail to predict this? Hartmann's response is quiet. Intelligence did not fail. We were informed of Soviet reserve buildups. We were warned about vulnerability on our flanks. The warnings were dismissed because they did not fit the desired narrative. Weber's hands shake slightly as he adjusts his reading glasses. The Sixth Army must be relieved. Richter provides the naval perspective, though it offers no comfort. Relief requires forces we have already committed elsewhere. Logistics. We are already straining. Time we may not have before winter becomes insurmountable. The three men understand what this means. The 18-month timeline is proving accurate. The decisive victory needed by spring 1943 is slipping away. The window is closing exactly as predicted. December brings the final collapse of illusions. On December 12th, Hartmann is working late when Weber appears at his door. The Generalfeldmarschall looks haggard. Older than his 60 years, he carries a bottle and 2 glasses. May I? Hartmann gestures to a chair. Weber pours generous measures and hands one to Hartmann. They drink in silence for several minutes. Finally, Weber speaks, his words slightly slurred. I have read the production figures. The real ones. Not the versions we present to the Reichsfuhrer. The actual intelligence assessments. Hartmann waits. The numbers do not lie. Do they? No. We cannot win. Not in any meaningful time frame. Weber's voice breaks slightly. I have known this since August. Since your conference. Perhaps even before. But I could not admit it because if I admit it, then what have I served? What have all these years meant? Hartmann's response is gentle. We served because we are soldiers. The cause does not determine the obligation. We took oaths. We executed orders. We maintained professional standards. That service has value independent of strategic outcome. Weber shakes his head. That is not enough. It cannot be enough. It has to be, because it is all we have left. Weber drains his glass and pours another. Ostheim was killed because he told the truth. You know that? Do you not? Yes. And we remain silent because speaking truth equals death. We remain silent because we cannot change the fundamental strategic reality through speech. Ostheim's honesty changed nothing except his own fate. Weber stares into his glass. So we serve a system we know is failing. We present analyses we know are false. We watch young officers die in campaigns we know cannot succeed. And we call this service. Hartmann has no answer that makes it bearable. Weber drinks heavily and speaks again, his words increasingly unsteady. I have a son, Klaus, 23 years old, serving with the 16th Panzer Division on the Eastern Front. I tried to write him a letter last week. I wanted to tell him something meaningful, something about obligation, sacrifice, purpose, but I could not write it because I would have to lie to him, and I am too tired to lie anymore. What would you tell him if you told the truth? That we are losing, that his service will not prevent defeat, that he should try to survive because survival is the only victory available to him now. But a father cannot tell his son that his sacrifice is futile, so I will tell him nothing. And he will believe the comfortable lies until reality teaches him otherwise. He never sends a letter. He never gets the chance. Weber finishes the bottle. Eventually, he leaves, walking unsteadily down the hallway. The next morning, he appears at briefings looking exhausted but composed. He presents the standard optimistic assessments. He echoes Steiner's confidence. The conversation of the previous night might never have happened. Weber has made his choice. He will continue to serve loyally because the alternative is psychological collapse. The certainty of the cause provides structure, meaning, purpose. Without it, there is only the void. Better to believe the comfortable lie than face the unbearable truth. December 20th. Hartmann and Richter meet for what has become an irregular but essential ritual. They find a quiet room where they can speak without being overheard and compare notes on the war's actual progression versus its official narrative. Richter brings the latest Atlantic figures. November was the worst month yet for U-boat losses. 18 boats. We sank less tonnage than any month this year. The escorts are simply too effective now. Hartmann shares Eastern Front assessments. Stalingrad will fall. Our forces, not theirs. The relief attempts are failing. We will lose the entire 6th Army. 250,000 men. They sit in silence, contemplating the figures. Richter breaks the quiet. Do you remember June? When we first learned about Midway? How could I forget? I remember thinking we had perhaps a year to turn this around. Time to achieve something decisive before the Americans became unstoppable. I was optimistic in my estimate. You gave us 18 months in your sealed memo. I was being generous. We have 10 months left of that timeline. And look where we are. Stalingrad about to fall. Atlantic campaign failing. Americans building forces in North Africa for eventual invasion of Europe. Every single prediction coming true. Hartmann pulls out a folder. Inside are copies of his June predictions alongside current intelligence summaries. The correlation is disturbing. Every timeline matches. Every trend confirmed. When did you know? Really know. Without doubt. Richter considers. June 7th. When I saw the carrier replacement schedules, I understood we were fighting production equations. You cannot defeat numerical superiority with courage or ideology. The ratios are merciless, and yet we continue. What choice do we have? Refuse our obligations. That changes nothing except our own fates. Speak truth publicly. Ostheim demonstrated the result. We serve until the system collapses because we are professionals. That is what professionals do. Hartman nods slowly. Klaus, I need to ask you something. When you send U-boats on operations now, knowing the strategic campaign is already lost, what do you tell yourself? Richter's answer comes after a long pause. I tell myself that those men need mission and purpose. A soldier without mission collapses faster than a soldier in a losing battle. So I continue operations not to win the war, but to give them honorable work until the inevitable end. It is all I can offer them. Meaningful service in a meaningless strategic context. That is a heavy burden. It is the burden of command when you see clearly but cannot act freely. We carry knowledge that would destroy morale if widely known, so we carry it alone. They sit together in the gathering darkness. Outside, winter settles over Berlin. The Eastern Front freezes. The Atlantic grows stormy. In the Pacific, American forces continue their advance, island by island, exactly as predicted. The war proceeds according to numerical certainty disguised as military conflict. On December 28, 1942, Hartman updates his locked memorandum. The original June document remains secured. This edition will join it. December 28, 1942. 6 months have passed since Midway revealed the strategic impossibility of Axis victory. Every prediction made in June has materialized with disturbing accuracy. The Eastern Offensive has failed to achieve decisive results. Stalingrad, meant to be the breakthrough, has become a catastrophic encirclement of our own forces. The window for Soviet collapse has closed. The Atlantic campaign deteriorates monthly. American production exceeds our sinking capacity. U-boat losses rise while effectiveness declines. American forces have begun offensive operations in multiple theaters simultaneously. North Africa, the Pacific. Their industrial mobilization continues to accelerate. The timeline calculated in June suggested 18 months until strategic impossibility of victory. We are now at month 6. The remaining 12 months will determine only the manner of defeat, not its occurrence. Colonel Ostheim is dead. Major Brandt has requested frontline transfer, preferring honest combat to dishonest staff work. Others who saw clearly have been silenced or removed. General Feldmarschall Weber knows the truth but has chosen psychological denial as survival mechanism. He serves loyally while drinking heavily. He presents optimistic assessments while privately understanding their falseness. Gross Admiral Richter continues submarine operations, knowing the strategic campaign is lost. He maintains mission tempo to preserve unit cohesion and morale, providing his men honorable service in a failed strategy. I continue my obligations with professional rigor while documenting truth for historical record. We are all caught in the same contradiction. Professional soldiers serving a doomed cause, because refusing our oaths changes nothing except our own honor. The question historians will ask is whether we were criminals for serving or cowards for not refusing. I have no answer that satisfies either judgment. I know only that we were warned in June 1942, and we marched forward anyway. Perhaps that is our true crime. Not that we lost, but that we knew we would lose and continued regardless, extending suffering for no strategic purpose. The war is entering its 3rd year. It will last at least 2 more, possibly 3. Every additional month of conflict is waste of lives, resources, potential. But the system cannot stop itself. It can only run until exhaustion forces cessation. We serve that system, and that service implicates us in its continuation. History will not be kind. We do not deserve kindness. He seals this document with the others. A record of dissent, of clarity without power, of obligation without redemption. The year 1942 ends. The year that began with German forces advancing on all fronts, confident in ultimate victory, closes with encirclement at Stalingrad, failure in the Atlantic, and American forces on the offensive. Midway's warning has been fulfilled in every particular. The men who understood this in June now watch the predictions unfold with grim recognition. They continue their obligations because that is what soldiers do. They serve professionally even when service has become complicity. They carry the weight of knowledge without the power to act on it. They watch younger officers die, believing in victory while privately calculating defeat. They are not yet defeated on the battlefield, but they are defeated in understanding, and that defeat, invisible to those who do not see the production equations, is already complete. What remains is only the playing out of calculations already solved, the working through of logistics already tabulated, the manifestation of industrial capacity already documented. The war continues. But for those who see clearly, the war is already lost. All that remains is determining how many will die before reality becomes undeniable to those who still choose blindness over numerical truth. In his office, in the quiet hours after midnight, Hartman sits with his locked documents and wonders if recording the truth matters when documentation cannot prevent it. He has no answer. Only obligation. Only the professional execution of tasks he knows are futile. Only the maintenance of standards in service of failure. It is not enough. But it is all soldiers have when production capacity defeats ideology. And ideology refuses to acknowledge defeat. The year ends. The predictions continue. The war grinds forward according to equations written in industrial output and supply logistics, equations that care nothing for courage or belief. And in the silence of locked records and private knowledge, the truth waits patiently for history to confirm what the numbers already know. January 1943 brings the news that Hartmann and Richter have been expecting, but dreading. The Sixth Army at Stalingrad surrenders. Over 250,000 men, Germany's finest formations, simply cease to exist as a fighting force. The Soviet victory is complete, total, undeniable. Hartmann reads the casualty reports in his office. The numbers are clinical, precise. So many thousand killed, so many captured. Equipment losses enumerated in detailed lists. Tanks, artillery, vehicles, all gone. An entire army erased from the order of battle. He retrieves his June 1942 memorandum from the locked drawer, opens it, reads his own prediction. Germany has approximately 18 months to achieve decisive victory over the Soviet Union. June 1942 to January 1943. 7 months. He had given them 18. The failure arrived early, ahead of even his pessimistic timeline. He adds a brief notation to the document. Stalingrad confirms strategic failure ahead of projected schedule. Remaining predictions are likely to manifest sooner than estimated. The public response to Stalingrad is carefully managed. The losses acknowledged but framed as heroic sacrifice. Necessary delay. Tactical adjustment. Steiner gives a speech about resilience and determination. Weber issues orders emphasizing continued operations on all fronts. The machinery of command absorbs the disaster and continues functioning. But privately, among those who understand numbers, Stalingrad marks the point of no return. The Eastern Front will now be defensive. The initiative belongs to the Soviets. The war of rapid maneuver and decisive breakthrough is over. What remains is grinding attrition. And attrition favors the side with more men, more production, more capacity to absorb losses without operational collapse. The weeks following Stalingrad see a shift in how the senior staff functions. The optimism that once characterized planning sessions gives way to grim pragmatism. Officers discuss how to slow Soviet advances rather than how to achieve breakthroughs. The language changes from offensive to defensive, from decisive to sustainable, from victory to survival. Weber ages visibly during this period. His hands shake more frequently. The drinking that began as evening relaxation becomes daytime necessity. He still attends every briefing, still signs every order, but the vitality has drained from him. He is performing functions rather than leading. One afternoon in late January, Hartmann finds Weber standing alone in the map room, staring at the Eastern Front display. The pins showing German positions have been pushed back significantly since the previous month. The arrows that once pointed east now point in all directions. Defensive reactions to Soviet pressure. Ernst, Weber does not turn. Do you remember June? When we thought we had time? Yes. 7 months. We had 7 months before it all came apart. Your 18-month estimate was generous. I hoped I was wrong. You knew you were not. That is the burden you carry. Being right about disaster while everyone else clings to comfortable delusions. It is a burden we both carry now. Weber finally turns, and Hartmann is shocked by how much the man has aged. The face is drawn, the eyes hollowed by sleeplessness and alcohol. This is a man approaching the end of his capacity to function. I received a letter from my son yesterday. Klaus, he is still alive, still fighting in the East. He wrote about his men, about their courage, about their belief that what they do matters. And I could not bring myself to write back, because what would I say? That their courage is wasted, that their belief is fiction, that they are dying for a cause already lost. You tell him you are proud of his service, that he should maintain his honor and protect his men, that survival itself is honorable when everything else has failed. Weber nods slowly. Yes, I suppose that is all a father can say. But the letter is never sent. 2 months later, in March 1944, another casualty notification will arrive. Lieutenant Klaus Weber, killed in action during Soviet Spring Offensive. Eastern Front. The details will be sparse. The circumstances unclear. Just another name among hundreds of thousands. When Hartmann delivers the notification personally, Weber will read it without visible emotion. Then he will place it carefully in his desk drawer, pour a drink, and return to the day's briefings as if nothing has happened. But something breaks inside him that day. The last connection to belief and purpose, the final thread holding together the illusion that service matters. From that day forward, Weber will be a shell performing functions, waiting for the end. But that is still more than a year away. In January 1943, hope is not yet completely extinguished, only profoundly damaged. Spring 1943. The war enters its fourth year. Intelligence reports from the Pacific show American advances continuing with methodical efficiency, island after island. The Japanese fight with desperate courage but lose ground consistently. Their carrier fleet, devastated at Midway, never recovers operational strength. In North Africa, the last Axis forces surrender in May. Another 250,000 men lost. The Mediterranean is no longer contested. Allied forces now control staging areas for invasion of southern Europe. Each loss follows the predicted pattern. Each defeat arrives on schedule. But it is in the Atlantic that spring 1943 brings the most devastating confirmation of Hartmann's analysis. The month that will be remembered as Black May sees the U-boat campaign suffer catastrophic, unsustainable losses. Richter watches the casualty reports arrive with increasing horror. May 1st, 2 boats lost. May 4th, 3 more. May 6th, 4 boats in a single day. The numbers accumulate with sickening regularity. By mid-month, the losses exceed anything experienced in the entire war. The causes are clear from debriefing the survivors. Allied escort tactics have evolved dramatically. Air coverage has closed the gaps where submarines once operated safely. Detection technology has improved beyond German countermeasures. Radio intercepts suggest code breaking, though this cannot be confirmed. Most devastating of all, American shipbuilding has reached the point where convoy escorts outnumber attacking submarines. The hunters have become the hunted. On May 24th, Richter compiles the monthly summary. 41 U-boats lost. 41. Against tonnage sunk, that barely equals 2 weeks of American production. He sits in his office that evening, the report in front of him, and understands with absolute clarity that the Atlantic campaign is finished. Not suspended, not delayed. Finished. The strategic objective of strangling Allied supply lines cannot be achieved. The numerical impossibility has manifested. He finds Hartmann in the operations wing. The general is working late, as usual, reviewing intelligence summaries. It is over. The Atlantic campaign. We cannot sustain these loss rates. American shipbuilding exceeds our sinking capacity by margins that worsen monthly. I am sending men to die in operations that achieve no strategic purpose. Yet you continue operations. Richter's voice is hollow. Because soldiers without mission collapse psychologically before they collapse physically. I can give them purpose until the end. Honorable service and failed strategy. It is all I have to offer. Hartmann understands. He faces the same calculation daily. Continue professional execution of obligations that serve no strategic purpose. Or watch the entire system fracture from loss of purpose. They choose continuation. Because structure, even failing structure, is preferable to chaos. Because men who have spent their lives as soldiers cannot simply stop being soldiers. Because the alternative to serving is confronting the void of purposelessness. The months accumulate. Summer, fall, winter returns. Throughout 1943, the predictions from Hartmann's June 1942 assessment continue to manifest with disturbing precision. American production figures released through intelligence channels show acceleration, not plateau. Britain's bomber offensive intensifies, striking German industrial centers with increasing frequency and accuracy. The Eastern Front sees Soviet advances that German forces can slow, but not stop. Resources grow scarcer. Fuel allocations tighten. Replacement personnel arrive with less training. Equipment quality declines as production struggles to meet demand. The daily degradation is incremental but cumulative. Each small shortage, each minor delay, each reduced allocation adds to a system under increasing strain. The bombing campaign brings the war home to German cities in ways previously confined to front lines. Allied aircraft strike targets with growing precision. Industrial output suffers. Transportation networks degrade. The civilian population experiences privation that was once theoretical. Each month brings confirmation of production equations over ideology. Each quarter shows trends that cannot be reversed through will alone. In November, Major Hans Brandt's last letter arrives, written weeks before his death. It reaches Hartmann through military mail systems. The handwriting is steady despite the content. General Hartmann, I write this knowing I may not survive to see your response. The Eastern Front is a mechanism of attrition. We fight well. Our men maintain discipline and courage. But the enemy has more men, more equipment, more ability to sustain losses. Each action we win tactically contributes to strategic defeat we cannot prevent. I chose frontline service to escape institutional dishonesty. I have found instead that honesty exists nowhere in this war. Even here, we tell ourselves that the next defensive line will hold. The next counterattack will succeed. The next supply convoy will arrive. These are comfortable fictions. You told me that soldiers serve regardless of outcome. I understand now what you meant. Service does not require victory. It requires only character. I serve honorably not because I believe we will win, but because professional service is its own justification. Thank you for preparing me for this understanding. It made the transition from belief to resignation more bearable. I do not expect to survive this winter. If I do not, please know that I chose this death consciously. Better honest combat than dishonest survival. Major Hans Brandt. 3 weeks later, the casualty notification arrives. Killed in action during Soviet offensive operations. November 8th, 1943. Grid coordinates. Unit designation. Cause of death. Artillery fire. The bureaucratic language of military death. Impersonal and final. Hartman files the letter with his locked documents. Another witness to clarity. Another officer who saw the numerical reality and could not bear to serve in positions where truth must be concealed. The honest ones die first. Those who can live with contradictions survive. Winter, 1943, becomes spring, 1944. The years blur together now. Each season brings the same pattern. Soviet advances in the east. Allied bombing increasing from the west. Production figures showing ever-widening gaps. Weber's deterioration accelerates. The drinking is no longer concealed. His health visibly fails. He still performs his functions, still presents optimistic assessments, but the performance costs him. He is maintaining a facade that requires increasing effort to sustain. March 1944 brings the notification about his son. Hartman delivers it personally. As protocol demands for senior officers, Weber reads it once, folds it carefully, places it in his desk drawer. Thank you for informing me personally. Friedrich, Ernst, I am deeply sorry. He was a good soldier. He did his obligation. That is all one can ask. If you need time, I need to complete today's briefing schedule. Personal matters do not suspend operational requirements. The conversation ends. Weber returns to work. That evening, Hartman finds him in his office, unconscious from alcohol. The photograph of a young man in uniform on the desk beside him. Medical staff take him to sickbay. He recovers physically, but something fundamental has broken. From that day forward, Weber is a shell performing functions, waiting for the end. The last connection to belief and purpose has been severed. The final thread holding together the illusion that service matters has snapped. He continues to appear at briefings. He continues to sign orders. But there is no conviction behind the motions, only mechanical compliance. He has become what Hartman feared all along, a professional reduced to function without meaning. June 1944 arrives. 2 years since Midway. 2 years since the warning that changed everything for those capable of understanding warnings. On June 6, Allied forces land in Normandy. The invasion everyone knew was coming finally materializes. The scale is staggering beyond even pessimistic estimates. Thousands of ships, air superiority absolute, logistics that dwarf anything Germany can muster. Hartman stands in the operations room, watching reports flow in. Beach landings, airborne drops, naval bombardment. The machinery of American industrial power made manifest on European soil, exactly as predicted 24 months earlier. Richter joins him, reading over his shoulder. 2 years, to the month. We calculated this moment in June 1942. Yes, every prediction, every timeline, all accurate. Yes, Hartman's voice is barely audible. We knew, and we could not stop it. The following weeks see German forces contest every hedgerow, every village, every kilometer. The fighting is skilled and professional. Individual units perform admirably under impossible conditions, but the outcome is determined by factors beyond battlefield competence. Allied forces have air superiority that makes daytime movement suicidal, naval support that brings overwhelming firepower to contested positions, logistics unlimited by anything except imagination, and the ability to absorb casualties that would cripple German formations. By July, the situation is clear. The Normandy foothold is secure. Allied forces will break out. France will be liberated. Germany will face invasion from the west, while the Soviets close from the east. The vice tightens according to schedule. According to the equations written 24 months ago, in a locked memorandum that nobody read except the man who wrote it. In late July, an event occurs that Hartman observes but does not participate in. A group of senior officers attempts to remove Steiner through violence, seeking to end the war through negotiated settlement before total collapse. The attempt fails. Participants are hunted down and executed. The investigations spread like poison through the command structure, touching anyone suspected of defeatist thinking or questionable loyalty. Hartman and Richter both come under scrutiny. Their names appear on lists of officers who have expressed pessimistic assessments. The investigations probe their communications, their associates, their private statements. Gestapo officers interview subordinates about conversations, asking about tone, about implications, about anything that might suggest disloyalty. For 3 weeks, both men live under the shadow of potential arrest. They continue their duty, maintain their composure, answer questions carefully. They know that Ostheim's fate could easily become their own. Weber intervenes. In his one moment of moral courage during these terrible years, he uses his position to shield both men from deeper investigation. His reasoning, delivered to the Gestapo officer conducting the inquiry, is purely pragmatic and therefore acceptable. These officers are necessary for continued operations. General Hartmann's assessments have proven accurate, which makes him valuable for planning. Admiral Richter's experience is irreplaceable. Removing them now weakens our capability during critical period. Their pessimism is professional judgment, not political disloyalty. The investigator accepts this logic. Hartmann and Richter remain in their positions, but they understand how close they came to Ostheim's fate. The system that values their professional competence also watches them for signs of ideological unreliability. They walk a narrow line between useful and dangerous. That evening, Hartmann visits Weber's office to express gratitude. The General Feldmarschall looks worse than Hartmann has ever seen him. The alcohol is destroying him visibly now. You protected us. Weber does not look up from his papers. You were right about everything. The timeline, the production figures, the strategic impossibility. I have spent 2 years denying this publicly while knowing it privately. The least I can do is ensure that honest officers survive to see the end. It was a significant risk. We are all taking significant risks simply by continuing to serve. What is one more? They do not speak further, but something has shifted. Weber has acknowledged the truth openly, if only between the two of them. The facade is maintained for others, but between professionals. Reality is admitted. The protective gesture is also Weber's last meaningful act. After July 1944, he descends further into alcohol and dysfunction. He appears at briefings but contributes nothing. He signs documents but reads nothing. He has become a placeholder, a name on organizational charts, a title without authority. Autumn 1944. The maps tell the story more clearly than words. Soviet forces approaching from the east, Allied forces advancing from the west and south, German territory shrinking, resources depleting, casualties mounting beyond replacement capacity. Steiner still issues orders as if will alone can reverse industrial capacity. Counteroffensives are planned with forces that do not exist. Defensive lines are designated that cannot be held. Wonder weapons are promised that remain perpetually months away from deployment. The staff executes these orders as professionally as circumstances allow. Knowing they are futile, they maintain the forms of military organization while the substance drains away. They hold meetings and make plans and issue directives, performing the rituals of command even as the power to command evaporates. December 1944. Winter settles again. The fifth winter of the war. Hartmann reviews casualty figures and calculates how many men remain. The numerical analysis is simple and brutal. Combat losses plus wounded plus sick minus replacements equals declining strength. Each month, German forces become weaker while enemies become stronger. The gap widens. The end approaches. The predictions made in June 1942 move toward their inevitable conclusion. He updates his locked memorandum one final time before the collapse. December 1944. 30 months since Midway. Every prediction has materialized. Soviet forces on German borders. Allied forces in France and advancing. Air superiority absolute. Production ratios impossible to overcome. Major Brandt is dead. Colonel Ostheim is dead. Weber's son is dead. Hundreds of officers who served professionally are dead. Thousands of competent soldiers are dead. Millions of lives wasted in strategic impossibility. We continue to serve. Not because we believe victory is possible. Not because we think our service matters strategically. We serve because we are soldiers, and soldiers serve until the system collapses or they do. General Feldmarschall Weber maintains public loyalty while privately destroyed. His son's death completed his psychological collapse. He functions mechanically, waiting for the end. Gross Admiral Richter continues operations knowing they achieved nothing. He provides his men honorable work in a failed strategy because work is preferable to acknowledging futility. I perform my obligations with professional rigor while documenting our descent for historical record. We are all caught in the same contradiction. Professional soldiers serving a doomed cause because refusing our oaths changes nothing except our own honor. The question remains unanswered. Were we criminals for serving or cowards for not refusing? I have no resolution that satisfies both judgment and conscience. Spring will bring final collapse. The predictions end where they began. In recognition of numerical certainty manifested through accumulated consequences, he seals this document with the others and locks them away. The record is complete. The accounting is done. All that remains is the final act. January 1945. The final months, Soviet forces launch their winter offensive. The Eastern Front collapses in sections. Entire army groups encircled or destroyed. Cities fall. Refugees flee westward. The flood cannot be stopped, only briefly delayed. In the west, Allied forces resume their advance after repelling the last German counteroffensive. The Rhine will be crossed. Germany itself will be invaded. The homeland that was supposed to be protected by victories abroad now faces occupation. The staff meetings become surreal. Steiner issues orders to units that no longer exist. He moves pins on maps representing divisions that have been destroyed. He speaks of victory while bombs fall on Berlin nightly. His grip on reality has failed completely. Weber simply echoes whatever Steiner says. His spirit is broken beyond repair. He drinks constantly now. His health deteriorates visibly. He has become a shell performing functions without conviction, waiting for death to release him from the burden of failed service. Richter ceases submarine operations in March. There are no submarines left to operate. The boats have been sunk. The crews killed. The bases overrun. The campaign that was supposed to strangle Britain into submission has ended in complete failure. He transfers to administrative duties, managing the orderly shutdown of naval operations, overseeing the surrender of remaining assets. Hartmann continues compiling intelligence summaries that no one reads with comprehension. The reports detail advances, encirclements, surrenders. The maps show shrinking territory. The numbers show depleting resources. Everyone sees the information. Few acknowledge its meaning. Denial persists even as reality becomes undeniable. In late April, as Soviet forces enter Berlin, Hartmann retrieves all his locked documents from the safe. The June 1942 Midway Memorandum, the December assessments, the updated predictions, Brandt's final letter, lost times transfer orders, all of it. He places them in a waterproof case and prepares for what comes next. These documents are his legacy, his testimony, his accounting. They prove that truth was known, that reality was documented, that the descent into catastrophe was predictable and predicted. On April 30th, word spreads that Steiner has taken his own life. The details are clear despite initial confusion. Suicide in his bunker as Soviet forces close in. The supreme leadership has ended by its own hand, unable to face the consequences of the disaster it created. Weber is found in his office that same day, unconscious from alcohol and exhaustion. Medical personnel attempt treatment, but he never recovers meaningful function. He dies in Allied custody 3 weeks later, his body destroyed by years of alcohol abuse and psychological collapse. Richter surrenders to British forces in northern Germany on May 2nd. He is taken into custody without incident. Professional to the end, Hartmann remains in Berlin until Soviet forces secure the Reich Chancellery. He surrenders on May 3rd with his documents intact. He presents them to the Soviet commander as evidence, as historical record, as testimony to what was known and when. The war in Europe ends on May 8th, 1945. 3 years since Midway. Almost exactly. The timeline has completed its predicted course. The warnings delivered in June 1942 have been fulfilled in every particular. Summer 1945. Allied interrogation facilities in southern Germany. The officers who survived are separated, questioned, processed. The machinery of victor's justice begins its work. War crimes tribunals are organized. Evidence is compiled. Accountability is demanded. Hartmann sits in a small room across from an American military intelligence officer. The officer is Navy, insignia indicating he served in the Pacific Theater. He speaks German competently, with the accent of someone who learned the language formally rather than natively. I am Captain Robert Morrison, United States Navy. I will be conducting your interrogation regarding strategic planning and decision-making processes within the German High Command. Hartmann nods. I will answer truthfully. Morrison opens a file containing Hartmann's locked documents, recovered from his surrender. These are remarkable. You predicted the course of the war with significant accuracy beginning in June 1942, after the Battle of Midway. I calculated timelines based on production capacity and logistics. The numbers were clear. Yet you continued to serve. Yes. Why? Hartmann considers how to answer truthfully. Because I am a professional soldier. My oath was to service, not to victory. When you are young, you think those are the same thing. They are not. Victory requires favorable conditions. Service requires only character. Morrison writes notes. You knew the war was lost as early as June 1942. I knew that victory required achieving decisive results within a specific timeline. When that timeline elapsed without achieving those results, defeat became strategically certain. Yes. Did others know this? Some. Hartmann pulls the interrogator's attention to specific documents. Gross Admiral Richter understood from the beginning. General Feldmarschall Marshal Weber knew but could not admit it. Younger officers like Major Brandt saw it and chose honest death over dishonest survival. Morrison reads Brandt's letter carefully. What should this officer have done differently? Hartman's voice is quiet. Nothing. And everything. We were professionals serving a criminal cause. That contradiction cannot be resolved through individual choice. Only endured. So you place responsibility on the system rather than on individuals. I place responsibility on both. The system was criminal. We served the system. We are therefore implicated in its crimes. But we also maintained professional standards, protected our men where possible, executed our obligations competently. These things exist simultaneously. They do not cancel each other out. Morrison pauses in his note-taking. I fought at Midway. I was on Enterprise. I watched Japanese carriers burn. Hartman meets his eyes. Then you witness the moment when numerical reality became visible. When industrial capacity manifested as combat power. When our strategic assumptions collapsed in fire and smoke. Morrison nods slowly. We knew we had won something significant. We did not know it had changed everything. It changed everything. Your survival and our understanding of your survival meant time favored you. Every month that passed made your victory more certain and ours more impossible. We saw this clearly and could not prevent it. A long silence settles between them. Two professionals who fought on opposite sides, now sitting in a quiet room discussing how the war was decided not by courage, but by production capacity. Finally, Morrison speaks again. I need to ask you something off the record. If you had been in my position, serving a nation whose cause was doomed, would you have refused your oath? Hartman considers this carefully. I would like to think yes. I would like to believe I would have had that courage, but I served in a losing cause. And I did not refuse, so I cannot claim I would have acted differently in other circumstances. Righteousness is easy when production equations favor you, much harder when they oppose you. Morrison closes his notebook. This conversation will be recorded in my report. Your documents will be entered as evidence. You will face tribunal for your role in the war's continuation, despite knowledge of its futility. I understand. For what it is worth, I find your honesty notable. Honesty is all I have left. I served professionally. I documented truthfully. I cannot claim this absolves me. Only that it represents the full accounting. Morrison stands to leave, then pauses. The Battle of Midway sank 4 carriers. But reading your documents, it seems it sank something else too. Hartman nods. It sank the last illusion that professionalism could redeem a criminal cause. That service without righteousness was sufficient. That executing orders competently in an evil system made one less culpable than executing them incompetently. And your conclusion, that we were very competent. And that makes our service worse, not better, because we extended suffering through professional excellence rather than hastening its end through incompetence. Morrison leaves. Hartman remains in the small room, alone with the full weight of his service, the complete burden of his choices. The tribunal convenes weeks later. Hartman testifies to his knowledge and actions. He provides complete accounting without mitigation or excuse. He admits to knowing the war was lost and continuing to serve anyway. He presents his documents as evidence of what was known and when. The judge is deliberate. The verdict acknowledges his technical honesty and cooperation, but finds that continued service despite knowledge constitutes complicity in the prolongation of the war and its associated crimes. He is sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, not execution. His cooperation and documentation are considered mitigating factors. His lack of direct involvement in atrocities provides some defense, but his service as a senior officer in a criminal regime cannot be excused. Richter receives similar judgment. His naval operations, while professionally executed, serve strategic goals that prolong suffering. 10 years. Weber is deemed medically unfit for trial. He dies in custody before proceedings conclude, his body destroyed by the years of alcohol abuse and psychological collapse. No verdict is ever rendered. In his cell, Hartman writes one final entry for the historical record. The war is over. We lost exactly as predicted, exactly on the timeline calculated. The Americans we underestimated proved competent, organized, and implacable. The industrial advantage we dismissed proved decisive. Midway was not a turning point. It was a mirror. It showed us what we refused to see until we could not avoid seeing it. That we were already defeated before we knew we were fighting. That production capacity would overcome courage. That numerical superiority would defeat will. I served knowing this. Other officers served knowing this. We continued because we were professionals, because we took oaths, because we believed service existed independent of outcome. History will ask whether we were criminals or soldiers. The answer is we were both. These categories are not mutually exclusive. We served a criminal system professionally. That makes us professional criminals. The burden of prescient service is worse than the burden of ignorant service. We cannot claim we did not know. We knew, and we served anyway. Midway taught us we were defeated. We spent 3 years proving Midway correct. That is the true cost of the battle. Not ships sunk or men lost, but knowledge gained and acted upon in service of evil, despite full awareness of that evil. There is no redemption in this accounting. Only accuracy. We knew, and we served, and that knowledge makes us more culpable, not less. This is the truth I will carry until judgment finds me worthy or wanting. 10 years later, Hartman will be released from prison. He will live quietly in a small town, refusing interviews, declining to write memoirs. When historians contact him, he will refer them to his wartime documents, now part of official records. He will die in 1967, having spent his final years in silence, carrying the burden of knowing what he knew and doing what he did despite that knowledge. Richter will outlive him by a decade, also choosing silence over explanation. He will pass away in 1977, taking his private thoughts to the grave. The documents they left behind will be studied by military historians, strategic analysts, and ethicists. The questions they raise about service, knowledge, and complicity will remain unresolved. Professional soldiers who see clearly but serve regardless, who document truth but continue evil, who maintain honor while facilitating horror. The Battle of Midway sank 4 carriers in the Pacific on June 4th, 42. But in Berlin, it sank something deeper. The comfortable fiction that professional competence separated honorable soldiers from the causes they served. That service absolved choice. That executing orders well made one less culpable than executing them poorly. The officers who understood Midway's true meaning spent 3 years learning that professional service in a criminal cause is not redemption. It is complicity. They knew in June 1942. They served until May 1945. That knowledge, carried in locked documents and private recognition, represents the real legacy of Midway for those who saw it clearly. Not the tactical victory in the Pacific, but the strategic revelation in Berlin that some truths, once known, implicate everyone who continues despite knowing. That numerical reality is merciless. And that professional soldiers who serve doomed causes carry burdens that neither victory nor defeat can resolve. Only acknowledgement, only honest accounting, only the full weight of choices made with clear eyes. The war ended. The accounting began. And for men like Hartman and Richter, that accounting lasted the rest of their lives, carried in the knowledge that they saw the future clearly and marched toward it anyway. Professional and complicit, competent and criminal, dutiful and damned. The moment they knew was June 1942. The moment they admitted they knew was too late to matter. And that timing, more than any battle or defeat, defines their legacy. They were warned, they understood, they served, and history remembers them not for their professional competence, but for what that competence enabled.